I just want to say for an opening bit that when a code is set up for any activity, we should come to it with what I would call the right attitude. And if this code is coming from the fact that we've had some dissatisfaction with corporate performance, with the application of corporate governance, my purpose here is to say that in fact the reason why we have codes at all is that they're necessary for us to run our lives efficiently. And whatever definition of corporate governance you adopt, my first question is, what is all this for? Why do we have corporate governance? And is it useful for any purpose? And if it is useful, how do we decide what to do with it? I believe that corporate governance should justify its existence only if it brings distinct value that contributes positively to the performance of the enterprise. So it's not just a way of keeping executives on the straight and narrow. It is really designed to help our enterprises, our businesses, to produce the results that we like and to deliver the benefit that we think they should deliver, because eventually the positive effect of corporate governance, if it is good, is that the economy gets stronger. And therefore, corporate governance can be seen as a tool of socio-economic development. How did it all begin? And why is it that today it is an important subject for us to discuss? Remember, most businesses start as owner-managed businesses. The owner is the manager. He is also the beneficiary of the results that he produces. But when that business begins to do well, then there's expansion. And very soon, the owner discovers that the business is becoming too large for him or her alone to deal with. And so brings in professional managers, we'll call them that, people whose business with the enterprise is to come and be the manager of the enterprise. The owner remains the owner. And so between those two, there is a situation in which they are both trying to produce the same results, but there's always some tension about who really controls what. And the bigger the business grows, the larger the situation becomes, until we have what we have today, the capital market, where we have the investor, the professional manager, and the capital market. And you can see that here our stakeholders are becoming multiple. The issues that are raised by this arrangement are really, first, the issue of control. Who controls the enterprise? The owner or the investor must have some say in control. But the day-to-day control of the affairs of the enterprise really rests with management. And occasionally you'll find that there is a tension between those two. In addition to which, in our present situation, there are now multiple stakeholders of enterprises, especially if they're quoted publicly. And so this situation leads to not just tension, but sometimes conflict, because interests differ. And if you just take the interest of the investor, compare it with that of the employee, for example, you'll find that there are situations in which the employee believes that he should receive satisfaction before the investor receives his dividend. The investor, of course, thinks differently. And so, finally, we must have somebody or a group that deals with this situation of tension. That's why we have the board. The board is principally the agent of shareholders, but also needs to hold the interests of all stakeholders in balance. And if you look at what I call the parties to corporate governance, which is really made up of the stakeholders of the enterprise: the board, the management, the shareholders, the employees, the customers, the suppliers, the regulators, and that is not a full list yet. What I say here is that all these parties have an interest in the firm's performance. All of them make inputs to that performance. Without their input, the performance cannot be full, comprehensive. But they also have needs and expectations from the enterprise, and therefore that is why we have corporate governance. Corporate governance is the one that tries to make sure that the enterprise will meet all those expectations in a balanced way, and therefore keep the enterprise itself faithful to its objectives. What are those objectives? Fulfilling the owner's long-term strategic goals, considering and caring for the interest of employees, maintaining excellent relations with business associates, making sure we comply with statutory requirements, and taking account of the needs of the environment, which after all is the context within which we run our business. And so the principles of corporate governance, which we must all look at as we implement the code of corporate governance, is that we're looking for organizations that will offer fair returns for the input of each stakeholder, that will display appropriately high standards of business, and codes are meant to set the standards to which business should perform, that stakeholder interests, even where they differ, should be managed in an equitable way, that those who are responsible for managing the enterprise, who I call the office holders, should handle their responsibilities conscientiously and with good faith. And finally, that the organization itself should practice good ethics. Those are the core principles of corporate governance. And so, what does the code help us to do? I offer 3 platforms on which we take decisions in business. There are legal considerations that govern what we do. In other words, the statutes and rules that set standards. This is where our code is important. Standards and practices that become binding on all parties to transactions. But then there are professional considerations as well, where people like accountants and lawyers and so on will make inputs that are supposed to meet certain professional standards. If you take the accounting practices, for instance, we expect the accounts of companies to respond to certain standards, and this is where the professional norms come in. But the essence of the code and the essence of everything that we do rests on the third platform, which is the moral requirement. Moral requirement is the one that makes sure that we give full consideration and respect to the rights and interests of the other parties to every transaction. In other words, stakeholders are coming from different interest directions, but the moral requirement is that through this code of governance and other practices that we engage in, we should make sure that the interests that are important to the delivery of our results are not ignored. As the chairman of SEC said, we're coming from a direction in which recent developments have indicated significant failures in the practice of corporate governance. Many decisions have been taken without adequate transparency. Regulators and analysts have not always applied the right standards, especially in rating corporate performance. Boards of directors have often misread signs of imminent crisis, and shareholders themselves have not always held boards to account in a consistently successful manner so we have seen a lot of things that have given us concern. This is one of the reasons why we think that greater regulation is important if we follow the right principles. So what are the issues for the future? I see the strengthening of the individual stakeholders' role in corporate governance as an issue for the future. I see the institutional shareholders, the ones that really hold controlling equity in these companies, must bring their influence to bear in a positive way, promoting greater transparency in relationships in the capital market. The structure of executive compensation, you'll find that the code itself talks about this and advises that executive directors should not be the ones to fix executive compensation. Somebody should tell that to the National Assembly as well. The role of regulators and rating agencies. Codes of corporate governance that reflect contemporary realities. These are the issues for the future, and we're addressing one of those issues today, which is the launching of this Code of Corporate Governance. We must look for innovative ways of assessing corporate performance, ways that really dwell on the issues that are critical and relevant to the performance of companies. And so I say, what are the major challenges to all of us in managing stakeholder interests? I start by assuming that every board, every company will bring onto its board and management the kind of competence that it requires to run a successful business. But never forget your stakeholders. Communication with stakeholders is key. Communication not just in giving accurate information to stakeholders in good times, but also in giving them accurate information in times that are not so good. Because that is the way to be transparent with your stakeholders. And also we should not forget that communication is not a one-way affair. We should set up systems that enable us to listen to our stakeholders at all times as well. The other challenge that I see is the balancing of interests, ensuring over time that all legitimate interests are met, setting up an effective system of resolving situations, even if they lead to conflict. One of the issues that the code raises is that the board should assess its own performance. And in my interactions with boards over time, I have found that this business of measuring board performance is one of the issues on which boards appear to have not so confident a platform for which to act. And I'm saying here that really the board cannot assess its own performance unless it has set the criteria for that performance. And how will it set those criteria? Just by looking at the things that the board should deliver. For instance, the board should have a clear vision and mission for the enterprise. Is our vision clear enough? That is one of the tests we should apply. Are we directing strategy in the correct, with the correct thrust? Because we cannot know that unless we set strategy, set the direction for strategy, so we can question ourselves at the end of the year, have we kept faith with what we said we were going to do? A clear governance structure, board membership, how we bring people on board, and what roles we expect people to play on boards. Development for our directors. The chairman of SEC said that one of the things the code now suggests is that directors should be given opportunities to develop their competence in being directors of boards. effectiveness